The air around Sister Wives has always carried whispers of secrets, but the way this story has unfolded feels less like a reality show and more like a courtroom drama playing out in front of millions. Fans have described it as the final verdict in a case that's been building for over a decade, with hidden truths surfacing, loyalties shattered, and betrayals finally exposed. For years, the family presented themselves as one, but as the episodes rolled on, it was impossible not to notice the cracks widening. And when those cracks split wide open, it felt like viewers were watching a shocking trial of the heart. The talk of a hidden wife and a secret child became symbols of how much pain and secrecy had been buried beneath the surface, and when everything spilled into the open, it left fans stunned, angry, and heartbroken all at once. Hi friends, I'm Sophia, and welcome back to TLC's Sister Wives World. If you love this show as much as I do, and want to keep unpacking every twist, betrayal, and emotional moment, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. And please, drop your thoughts in the comments as we go, because I really want to know how you felt watching these moments explode on screen. This isn't just another season recap. What we're diving into today is the emotional verdict that broke this family apart. Christine walking away, Janelle demanding answers, Mary finally facing the ghosts of her past, and Robin clinging desperately to what's left of the dream. All of it came together like witnesses testifying under oath, each confession and confrontation pulling us closer to the truth. And by the end, it felt less like reality TV and more like justice being served in the court of public opinion. When Christine made the decision to leave Kody, it wasn't just a quiet exit or a simple goodbye. It was the moment that shifted the entire family dynamic. The point where the long brewing cracks finally turned into open wounds. Watching it unfold, it felt like she was stepping into her own kind of courtroom, laying her evidence on the table for everyone to see. Years of feeling dismissed, undervalued, and left behind came pouring out, and as viewers, we could feel every word like it was part of a testimony. Christine had spent years holding back her disappointment, but when she finally spoke up, it was raw and undeniable. And here's the thing. This wasn't happening in a vacuum. We'd seen it all start years earlier. The catfishing scandal with Mary, for example, had already shown fans how secrets could destroy trust. When that came to light, it was almost like Mary had taken the stand first, admitting not only her own mistakes, but exposing just how fragile her connection to Kody had become. That incident made it clear that behind the smiling family photos, there were darker truths being covered up. And once Christine made her move, those truths came roaring back into the spotlight. Then there's Janelle. For so long, she played the role of the steady, practical wife, the one who kept her head down and focused on raising her kids and building stability. But in the later seasons, especially when the tension over the family property and finances boiled over, Janelle found her voice in a new way. She started asking the questions that cut right to the heart of everything. Where was the money really going? Who was benefiting? And why did it always feel like decisions were being made to favor one household over another? Those moments were like cross-examinations in a trial, and Janelle wasn't afraid to push for answers. On the other side, you had Robin. She always tried to appear calm, loyal, and supportive, almost like she was giving her closing arguments in defense of Kody. But viewers could see how strained that loyalty became, especially when Christine openly challenged the family structure. Robin's tears, her insistence that they could still make it work, all came across as desperate attempts to sway the jury. And in this case, the jury was both the wives and the audience watching at home. The entire situation built up like a civil inquiry, with each wife bringing her own story, her own evidence, and her own truth. Christine's decision to leave wasn't just about her marriage. It exposed years of hidden resentment and the reality that the family wasn't as united as they wanted us to believe. Mary's past mistakes, Janelle's financial questions, and Robin's unwavering defense of Kody all collided in a way that felt like opening statements in a case none of them could avoid anymore. As fans, watching those scenes was both heartbreaking and strangely powerful. It was like being in the gallery of a courtroom, hearing testimony that you always suspected was true, but had never been spoken so openly before. Christine's courage to walk away set the stage for what would come next. A full unraveling of the family's carefully built image, with each wife forced to confront her own role in the story. Christine's confessionals during those later seasons hit differently. She didn't just talk about frustration. She laid out exactly how years of neglect had chipped away at her spirit. She admitted she felt like a basement wife, someone always pushed aside, never prioritized, never chosen. That honesty landed like sworn testimony, and you could sense that fans were leaning in, almost taking notes as she spoke. When Christine finally said she no longer wanted to be in a marriage with Kody, it was as if she dropped a stack of undeniable documents right on the table. Janelle, too, began speaking with a new sharpness. During those tense family meetings, she was the one to call out unfairness, especially when it came to finances and property. We all remember the heated conversations about Coyote Pass, the land that was supposed to represent their family's shared future. Janelle came prepared with questions about equity, ownership, and whether everyone was contributing equally. The way she demanded transparency had the energy of a cross-examination, and it showed a side of her that fans had been waiting years to see. Calm, steady Janelle turned into Janelle the truth-teller, unafraid to push back on Kody's explanations. Meanwhile, Robin's role shifted into that of the emotional defense attorney. Every time Christine or Janelle voiced their pain, Robin countered with tears, long explanations, or passionate claims that the family could still heal. To her, the bond wasn't broken, at least not beyond repair. But to many viewers, her words sounded more like rehearsed arguments, emotional but disconnected from the actual experiences Christine and Janelle were describing. Robin's insistence on loyalty made her look less like a neutral witness and more like someone desperately trying to protect her position. And then there was Mary, still sitting in the shadows of her past. Even if she wasn't the loudest voice during this time, her earlier catfish scandal lingered in every conversation. She was a reminder that once secrets are revealed, they can't be buried again. Her quiet presence during these family breakdowns was like someone who had already confessed and was now living out the consequences. Watching these episodes, the audience couldn't help but feel like each wife was taking the stand, delivering her testimony and exposing the family's fractures. Christine's voice carried the weight of years of disappointment. Janelle's questions highlighted the imbalance of power. Robin's defenses sounded like closing arguments, trying to sway opinion even as the facts stacked up against Kody's leadership. The drama was no longer subtle. Every word spoken in those confessionals, every heated family gathering, every uncomfortable pause, it was all being recorded, played back, and judged by the public. And as the voices of the wives grew stronger, Kody himself seemed to grow more defensive, almost like a man cornered by evidence he couldn't argue his way out of. For fans, this was the point where the show stopped being just about polygamy and turned into something deeper. A truth-telling session where the women refused to stay silent anymore. It wasn't just television, it was testimony. If the first two acts showed Christine and Janelle stepping into the spotlight, Act 3 was where Mary's shadow finally came forward. Her catfish scandal wasn't just a tabloid headline. It was a turning point that revealed just how lonely and disconnected she had been in her marriage with Kody. And when that truth finally became public, it landed like a confession. Mary admitted to being emotionally vulnerable, to reaching outside her marriage for connection, and to crossing lines that couldn't be undone. For fans, it felt like watching someone read their guilty plea, not because she wanted to hurt anyone, but because she couldn't survive in the silence any longer. That moment in the series wasn't just about Mary's personal choices. It exposed how fragile the structure of the family really was. If the first wife could feel so unseen that she looked for love in the wrong places, what did Ty Hat say about Kody's role as a husband? Fans saw it as proof that the cracks had been there all along, just waiting for the right moment to break wide open. At the same time, the emotional weight on the children was becoming more and more obvious. Aurora Brown, one of Robin's daughters, openly broke down on screen, describing the stress, the confusion, and the fear that came with the family's unraveling. It wasn't just about Kody and the wives anymore. It was about the kids watching their world collapse. Those moments hit viewers hard because they reminded everyone that this wasn't just drama for entertainment. Real people, especially the kids, were carrying the emotional scars of decisions made by the adults. Christine and Janelle continued to strengthen their positions during this period. They stood by each other, forming almost a coalition of honesty and independence. Christine's move out of the marriage was like a rallying cry for personal freedom, and Janelle's refusal to let financial control define her worth made her look stronger than ever. Side by side, their journeys contrasted sharply with Mary's guilt and Robin's denial. Robin's reactions during this act were some of the most polarizing. While Christine and Janelle grew stronger, Robin seemed increasingly desperate, clinging to Kody as though holding on to him meant holding the family together. But to many viewers, it felt like she was defending a crumbling case with shaky arguments. Her tears, her appeals to loyalty, her frustration, they all read like someone trying to stop a verdict that had already been decided. And then there was Kody, visibly unraveling as he lashed out, shifted blame, and tried to rewrite history in real time. His refusal to acknowledge Mary's pain, his anger toward Christine, and his defensiveness with Janelle only added to the sense that the trial of public opinion wasn't going in his favor. This act felt like a courtroom packed with new witnesses. Mary's confession brought in the weight of past mistakes. The children's visible pain added testimony no one could ignore. Christine and Janelle became star witnesses for the truth, while Robin tried to argue for mercy. And standing at the center was Kody, facing the reality that his family, once carefully built, was now dismantling piece by piece under the weight of its own secrets. By the time Act 4 rolled around, the tension inside the Brown family wasn't just emotional. It was starting to look like a legal or financial battle waiting to explode. The dream of building on Coyote Pass, which was once pitched as a symbol of unity and hope, had turned into a battlefield of resentment and suspicion. What was supposed to be their family's shared future became the perfect metaphor for everything broken. Paperwork without progress, promises without trust, and financial obligations that weighed heavier on some shoulders than others. Janelle, who had always been the practical one, stepped into the role of financial investigator. She questioned every detail about how the land was being divided, how the payments were being managed, and why it felt like her household was carrying more than its share. It was like watching her build a legal case piece by piece, demanding accountability where there had been none. Fans noticed how sharp her tone became in those moments. No more soft-spoken agreements, just clear, pointed questions that Kody struggled to answer. Christine, though no longer invested in Coyote Pass for her own in future, stood by Janelle like a co-counsel. Her decision to walk away gave her the freedom to speak truth without fear, and she often echoed what fans had been thinking all along. The financial plan was flawed, and the family unity it was supposed to symbolize was gone. Christine's independence, her ability to finally stand tall outside of Kody's shadow, only made Janelle's fight more compelling. Together, they embodied resilience in the face of manipulation. On the other side, Kody doubled down on control. He spoke with the authority of someone trying to keep the case in his favor, but his arguments rang hollow. He insisted that loyalty meant supporting him unconditionally, even when the numbers didn't add up. His frustration grew into anger, and his anger turned into personal attacks. Instead of addressing Janelle's questions, he often shifted the blame back onto the wives, accusing them of disloyalty, of selfishness, of failing the family vision. To viewers, it felt like the defense had lost its grip on reality. And then there was Robin. If Kody was the frustrated lawyer losing ground, Robin was his emotional co-counsel. Her tears, her pleas for unity, her desperate reminders of the family dream were all meant to soften the blow of his harsh words. But the problem was, by this point, fans weren't buying it. Her emotional appeals felt less like genuine hope and more like an attempt to hold on to power in a structure that was already collapsing. Mary remained the quiet observer during much of this phase, almost like a forgotten witness in the back of the courtroom. She had already been sidelined emotionally, and now she was sidelined financially too. Her voice didn't carry the same weight it once might have, but her silence spoke volumes, collapsing under its own debts and broken contracts. By the time everything reached its peak, It felt like we were watching the closing arguments of a trial that had dragged on for years. Every confession, every confrontation, every crack in loyalty had built to this point. The family that once promoted harmony and shared values was now standing on opposite sides of an invisible courtroom, presenting their final cases not just to each other, but to the viewers who had witnessed it all unfold. For Christine, her closing statement was her exit. She didn't just leave quietly. She made it clear that the love and trust were gone, that she couldn't keep pretending for the sake of appearances. Watching her pack up her life and say goodbye wasn't just sad, it was powerful. It was a verdict of independence, a declaration that she would no longer live under Kody's control. Fans saw her strength, and, in many ways, it set the tone for what the final judgment would feel like. Honest, heartbreaking, but necessary. Janelle's case rested on truth-telling. Her courage in calling out the financial imbalance and the double standards became her legacy within this chapter of the story. She didn't storm out dramatically, but she held her ground in a way that was just as impactful. Her final words weren't shouted. They were calm, steady, and filled with conviction. And that's what made them land so hard. To so many viewers, Janelle represented fairness, the voice of reason in a storm of manipulation. Mary, on the other hand, gave the most haunting confession. She admitted to her regrets, her mistakes, and the ways she had allowed herself to be pushed aside. Her emotional honesty hit fans deeply because it wasn't triumphant. It was raw. It was as if she was testifying against herself, acknowledging how much she had lost in the name of loyalty. In that moment, she didn't win back Kody's love. But she did win the empathy of viewers who had watched her suffer in silence for years. And then there was Robyn. Her final act was drenched in emotion, pleading for unity and painting herself as the last line of defense holding the family together. But the verdict of public opinion didn't go her way. By now, fans saw through the tears, believing that her closeness with Kody had always come at the expense of the other wives. Her closing argument may have been passionate, but it didn't sway the jury of viewers who had already made up their minds. Kody's defense was fiery but hollow. He insisted he was misunderstood, that he had given everything, that he was the one being wronged. But the anger, the bitterness, the refusal to accept responsibility, it all played out like the final desperate speech of someone who knew the verdict was against him. His attempts to shift blame no longer worked, because by this stage, the truth was already out. The shock of the verdict wasn't delivered by a judge or jury. It was delivered by the reality of shattered bonds, by the wives making their choices, by fans declaring their own judgment from their living rooms. The final verdict was clear. The dream of Sister Wives was over. What was once sold as a family united by faith and love now stood exposed as fractured, unequal, and unsustainable. The secrets, the betrayals, the hidden truths, they were all on record now, and no amount of damage control could erase them. Act 5 left viewers with one overwhelming feeling: closure. Not the happy ending anyone once imagined, but the honest ending that reality demanded.